and welcome to this Farm Advisory Service webinar. My name's Alec Perry, and this evening I'm joined by Robert Ramsey and Struan Candlish. We are here on behalf of the Scottish Farm Advisory Service, and this is episode 2 of the Water Margin Management in a Changing Climate series. In tonight's meeting, which is due to finish at around 9 o'clock, we're going to review the steps taken at Newlands Farm with Robert to protect the water environment, look at the ecological impacts of good water quality, and the past works and projects of the Ayrshire Rivers Trust, and at the same time look at practical management ideas for improving water quality on your farms, wherever you are across Scotland. Right, Struan, we're going to kick off with you tonight, so do you want to just take control and we'll get going?
Sure. Just let me know if this is coming up on everyone's screens okay.
Yep, that's good.
That looks something like okay. Right, well, my name is Struan Candlish. I work for Ayrshire Rivers Trust, which is actually our 20th anniversary this year, but due to COVID there's no birthday party. So we'll just give a bit of context and background to the trust, who we are and what we do. So there's our mission statement. It's to preserve and enhance the natural heritage, future generations for us now and going forward. And it's habitats and fisheries, but really going forward, it's more and more it's a catchment-based initiative as opposed to just fish. There's far bigger issues than just fish when you start looking at catchment. So what do? We do quite a lot. It's quite a varied role we have. Everything from habitat surveying, monitoring, which includes stuff like electrofishing, water quality and temperature. We do quite a lot of consultation responses. We involve education programs, invasive non-native plant species, and increasingly fish rescues as part of the people going in doing any developments in or around water. We remove fish prior to work happening just to minimise any potential damage. There we go. Yeah, so quickly, electrofishing, that's the sort of bread and butter through the summer months, and we do this with a number of sites across the various catchments in Ayrshire, and it's to really get a handle on juvenile fish numbers, reproductive success, where we're finding species such as trout and salmon, eels, could be monitoring for developments, and just like the picture there from the other day, we're in there removing fish prior to a sewage pipe being replaced. We use kayaks for surveys as well. Makes the job a little bit more fun. Fantastic way of actually, for one, getting to know a full river system, because you can start at the head of a river and go all the way down a decent flow in one day, and you very quickly get an idea of where the issues are, if it's erosion, if there's potential for tree planting. You can rapidly assess invasive non-native species. We also use it for the boards, where we can monitor fish-eating birds, piscivorous birds, and get a handle on numbers there. But yeah, it's a nice way of starting to understand your catchment a little bit better. So then to start to think and talk a little bit more about Ayrshire itself, we come into sort of land cover map, and you can see the bright lurid green colour there represents the improved grassland. So you can see, particularly in the Doon-Ayr, Irvine, the Garnock catchments there's the majority of that is improved grassland. So we've got a higher intensity of agriculture in these areas. Whereas you get down to this more southern part of Ayrshire, like in the Stinshire and Girvan catchments, and to an extent in the Upper Doon catchment, it's far more rural. You don't have the same populations that you do as you go further north, and the land itself is, on the whole, less intensive in terms of the amount of agriculture there. And some of the upland areas there are quite heavily dominated with coniferous forestry plantations, and we'll just touch on that towards the end and some of the impacts we see surrounding the coniferous plantations. So this was a list of best management plans. I actually took this from the Environment Agency document. I think there's something like 43 different best management plans they cite, but the ones I will just try and focus on for the remainder of the talk. Stream bank stabilisation, which Simon Ollie talked about a week or two ago. We've got quite an increasing amount of experience in stabilising eroding banks, livestock exclusion, riparian buffers, and sort of feed water and trough locations being some of the things we see issues with more often across our catchments. So this is just another SEPA, couple of screen grabs, and these are RBMP as river basin management planning. So these were to identify problems and failings within the water environment. So RBMP 1 across Ayrshire, we had the Ayr, the Doon, Irvine, River Garnock, and the North Ayrshire sort of coast, which gave us 5 of the 14 priority catchments in the first round there, which is 35% of all the priority catchments across Scotland. So we started off with a sort of disproportionate number of problems, I think, really, within Ayrshire. RBMT2 are just down to the water of Girvan there. So Ayrshire has sort of has historically had quite a number of sort of problems there. So start just talking a little bit about some of the stabilisation techniques that we use, and this is just a bit of willow weaving that we've been doing here. This was actually on a coastal burn in Ayr. So it's important to recognise that before you do any work like this, you need to check where you stand in terms of GBRs or registration with SEPA. So the link's there, but it's just always good to be aware of that. So this is the same bit of burn you can see in this picture. A few months on, once the willow started to root. I won't dwell on this too much because I think Simon Ollie did a good job of talking through the various different green engineering solutions that are available to people. But there's lots of different techniques and solutions. I think we have to bear in mind they're very site specific. Erosion is not just erosion, it depends how sure your banks are, what type of watercourse you have. Is it very spatey, or is it rise and fall more slowly? And a lot of time we're going to be hampered by what materials you have on site, particularly thinking about farms. Green engineering can quite often be quite a potentially cheap solution to problems, and using the material that you have on a farm or to hand is the best way of working there, because apart from anything else, you've got species of a local provenance, and you've got good confidence at that point they're going to work. Going forward, you need to be thinking about problems that we might have with pests and diseases. Ash dieback is becoming something we're seeing more and more across the countryside, and it does look like in the next few years that there'll be very few ash trees left, so that will make quite a significant dent. So we're no longer planting ash, which is a shame because ash was a great riverbank tree to have. The root systems were phenomenal. Yeah, so pros and cons here of green engineering. I think the pros sort of speak for themselves. Cons, material availability. It's not always easy to get hold of the species of willow that you want. Different species are going to be make a big difference to the type of work you're trying to do. It depends if you're trying to weave with it. You want something that's long, straight, and quite whippy that you can manipulate around stakes. So something like a VIM analysis is very useful there. Whereas if it's something more scrubby that you're looking to just get some bank cover, you might be looking more towards a goat willow. So it just depends what you have and then what it is you're actually trying to achieve. I think that's also very important to understand what outcome do you want to achieve through the work that you're doing, and so to have that worked out before you start doing anything else is very important. one of the cons at the bottom there is maybe considered experimental. I think we're starting to get past that now. Between ourselves and SEPA and other trust organisations across Scotland, this isn't too experimental now. We know we can solve problems, and some quite big problems, with use of green engineering techniques. So I won't dwell on this one either too much, but a lot of things to be sort of take into consideration. One of the things that sticks to my mind is the sort of the ongoing maintenance. We've done this work for landowners, and if you go back a slide here, you can see this is all willow in the background, and there's any amount there. But what can happen as the willow gets high, especially if it's in a situation where you've been using it to weave, it can start to get a bit top heavy and it may start to act like a bit of a sail on the wind and be liable to pull out. So you've got to crop it back, which from our perspective is good because it gives us lots of material then to go into a situation like the one we've put in front of you there and start to do something with a banking that's starting to collapse. So once you've got a source in place, willow grows phenomenally quickly. It's very difficult to kill, and it provides fantastic bank cover. The other thing that goes hand in hand with green engineering techniques is tree planting. What I would say is important to consider is that if you're doing green engineering or tree planting, excluding livestock for us is a must now. We've seen it too many occasions where we've tried to do it with guards and whatnot, and the animals find a way to nip off the tops of them or use them as a rubbing post, and very quickly your hard work is lost there. I think everyone knows the benefits of tree planting at this point, but one of the ones that we're focusing on is from a shading point of view, planting in such a way that we're shielding the worst of the sun in the summer from some of the burns, because we record water temperatures across a couple of catchments now, and we are seeing water temperatures sometimes getting up to sort of 24, 26.5 degrees centigrade. And at that point, we're getting into lethal range for trout and salmon, and there's no doubt that we'll be losing fish there. So planting trees, riparian trees is an increasingly important thing that we can do to try and mitigate some of that damage. This is just a picture here from the upper water of Girvan. This isn't a project that we've been a part of. We just took a picture of this the other day or the other week when we were out. And it's good to see that it's large scale broadleaf planting up there. This is important for a number of reasons. This won't be having much impact on water temperatures, but it will be slowing, well, in years to come, it will slow the rate at which water hits the land and reaches the river. The Girvan is notoriously spatey now, whereas it never used to be quite as bad as this. And one of the factors that's cited is the increasing amounts of forestry in the headwaters and the drainage that's going on up there. The water just hits the land and goes straight into the top of the Girvan. Water level rises very quickly, and I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have seen the headlines from that bus that got trapped in Daly a few years back now. So large upland scale planting like this is very important. You can see there they've got the fencing in as well to exclude the cattle. It's quite important. Here's a picture from just a few winters ago, and that's a salmon sheltering again in the water of Girvan underneath that fallen tree. So not just about buffering the rising water temperatures, it's fantastic habitat for fish, and we're quite encouraged to see when trees fall in. Anglers don't particularly like it because it makes it difficult to fish, but if you go in there and have a look about, if you're an electric fisher or just keep an eye, they're all very good areas to find fish. Fantastic habitat. It's a project we've been involved with here. This is a tributary of the River Doon, and if I just use my mouse here, this is the a very badly poached area, salmon spawning tributary. And you can see that log there is the same log that's in the picture just above. And these photos were taken, I think, within a couple of months of one another. And you can see the difference very quickly that fencing is made here. We've subsequently planted quite a lot of trees in these banks, try and protect a little bit from the sun, reduce the amount of erosion. And we've got good buffer strips here, because even though you've got the fencing in there and you've got the trees in there, it's going to take a while for all those things to really kick in. So by the time you've got a couple of years to wait before you've got a root system in place that's really going to stabilise those banks. And if you don't put an adequate buffer in there, we've seen it all too often. Farmers put in fencing, and within a year or two the fence is hanging just because they didn't. You've got to give the river just enough room to breathe and find its level, let it stabilise. But this has been a fantastic reel of work here, just with fencing and a little bit of weir removal downstream just to help fish get further up. And that's another fencing we went in recently, but there's a gate just up at the top of this, and we accept that you've got to allow livestock in to control rank vegetation, but in here all they've done is sort of decimate this bit of riverbank. There's a number of trees here, mature trees, but if the cattle or the sheep are getting in there regularly, they'll nip off the natural regeneration that should occur, and what you'll be left with is a nice line of mature trees. But once they start to go, there's no future generation coming in there. So it's just about being careful with how we allow grazing in behind these exclusion zones. We don't want to undo all the good work we've done through the fencing. So the main one for us that we see continually is diffuse pollution issues across almost all the catchments, and I'm sure everyone's aware, but the problems that come with that are nutrient enrichment, siltation, and what happens when you've got these releases of silt into the watercourse is they settle out amongst the natural substrates within the watercourse, and they basically sort of bind and lock in these substrates. And in an ideal world, or how it should be, is these substrates should be nice and loose and mobile, easily turned over for a fish, because what fish do is they'll turn over the gravel, lay their eggs in the depression, and basically they will then cover that depression with the eggs in it and make a nest. And if the substrates are locked in like they are in a run like this, then they're unable to do that, and natural reproduction rates just fall through the floor, and you've got a seriously declining fish population all of a sudden. This burn here, most inputs have stopped now. This area here has been fenced, and the vegetation is recovering. So that's on the surface of it, it's all good stuff. But fish, the problems is you can't mobilise the silt so easily. So fish are still struggling to recolonise this burn. So we're working with SEPA at the moment to try and come up with some solutions. It'll be something like gravel cleaning going around for like a fork or like a leaf blower to try and burst open those sediments and hopefully get some productivity going again in that situation. This is the one I took just at the weekend, actually. Photo up the top of one of the sort of feeder burns. And all we want people to do is to sort of play by the rules, and General Mining Rule 19, feeders must be positioned 10 metres from the bank top on river burns and ditches. Well, that's quite clearly not within 10 metres. A little bit of the photo at the top is cropped out. This is also a burn that's been levied in the past. So the bankings on either side have been built up to prevent the burn spilling out across the field. And whilst that protects agricultural ground, which is, you can see why people do it, and it's been done heavily across a lot of catchments in Ayrshire and probably across Scotland. All you do is moving a problem downstream. You're funneling water further downstream, and it'll erode either your bankings or someone else's bankings. With water, ideally what you want to do is reduce the the rate at which it gets into the burnt in the rivers, slow it down, and when you put a levee system in place, a river should be able to rise and spill out across the fields and lose its energy that way, but it's just perpetuated downstream. And if in a situation like this as well, there's no tree growth, because anything that does get away here is nipped off by livestock. You've got a congregation of animals right next to the watercourse, so you're going to have fecal matter going in there. If that fuel gets fertilised, there's a good chance that it's going to be fertiliser runoff, because you've no buffer zone there to prevent that nutrient reaching the watercourse. This is a historic photo, so this is pleased to say I think this has been resolved. But solutions, that everyone knows, I think it's just there's a certain amount of expense that goes with these kind of things. But fencing the water margins is the big one for us. If you fence your water margins, give a decent enough buffer, by and large nature does it itself. It's always good to plant trees, and there are grants available there to do that, but the first step is exclude livestock from the water margins, and a lot of these problems are then eliminated. Quite often we see feeder rings quite close to burns. This one here is quite clearly more than 10 metres away. The watercourse is just out of frame in this photo. I still think we would say this is an unacceptable level of poaching and erosion to be going on, because as soon as you get a dump of rain there, all that mud, that silt, that's all finding its way down into another feeder burn to a river. So stuff like moving these, rotating them, using solar pumps, reducing herd sizes or splitting herds up or rotating the fields in which these things are in will all help. But having the buffer zone in there will catch a lot of this sort of sediment before it ever hits a burn, which is what we'd like to see. Very quickly, we'll skim over some stuff with forestry, because we're involved with quite a lot of stuff in upland areas. But the right tree in the right place is the mantra that's being sort of bandied about nowadays. Conifers can be quite detrimental, especially when they're in close proximity to a burn like this, and you get natural regeneration occurring. I talked about earlier on the Girvan, altering hydrology. You got fertiliser runoffs when these trees are initially put in, and acidification is also a big problem. But also, with acidification comes the mobilisation of sort of heavier metals there, which can be quite toxic to fish. We'll maybe skim this very quickly. We've got a feeder burn here. It goes into a lock up at Lochdoon, or one of the locks up surrounding Lochdoon. It's become more acidic as time's gone on, which there's been more mobilisation of silts and sands. It's smothered spawning beds. I think the thing to say with something like this is, with the new water guidelines, planting this would be a thing of the past, but with the long-term thing that forestry is, this is still an issue. We'll skip invasives just for the sake of time, because it seems about 22 minutes. This is a nice example of what we'd like to see. Good buffers in place. This is another spawning burn that enters the River Doon. We have planted some trees. You can see there's some trees planted along the bankings there. And it's just a case of monitoring something like this now. We use a drone quite often for this type of work. It makes life a lot easier, and you can get some really nice perspectives. But on the Doon, we did quite a lot of work with the District Salmon Fishery Board and the landowners, and the Fishery Board put up quite a lot of money to help get fencing in place like this. So yeah, guards are essential, and stuff like willow in and around water makes excellent habitat, not just for aquatic species but also for terrestrial species. Quite a lot of kingfishers and stuff like this. We've even seen birds nesting in some of the willow weaving we've done. This is just a nice one to end almost with the stark difference that a bit of fencing can make in a burn. Just protecting the trees that are there, allowing regeneration to come through, and these banks are stable and well protected from what's going on around them. But as soon as you get out with an area like that, the bankings become less stable, becoming more heavily poached, and all the issues that we associate with those. And then thinking to the future, well, the rising water temperatures we talked about earlier on. Similar rainfall pattern or similar rainfall amounts, but the pattern changing wetter over winter. Excuse me, with more severe rainfall events and more pests and diseases coming. So we're seeing fish mortalities in rivers like the Stincher, which are quite shallow. We expect exacerbated by pollution. With the water temperatures, it doesn't help. So yeah, that concludes me. I think I ran a little bit over there, 24 minutes, but I'll pass back over to the powers that be.
Thanks very much, Struan. That was really good stuff. Struan, you brought up the issue of water trough placements within 10 meters of a water course there. Just a good opportunity to maybe plug the attachments that we have for tonight's event. There are a series of 5 documents. We've got 5 handouts, partly from the Farm Advisory Service, but also things like Mind the Gap, and poaching and erosion advice notes, as well as technical notes from Farming and Water Scotland. Robert, are you good to go?
I'm good to go, Alec. Yep.
Okay. So a bit of background here, and maybe Robert can jump in as well if he's got anything to say. But the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme, the current environmental scheme within the SRDP, was clearly set out to protect the water environment, and this is something that will be particularly important as we move forward into this so-called green recovery. So in cooperation with SEPA, Scottish Natural Heritage, now Nature Scot, and other environmental advisory bodies, we set up priority water areas within Scotland, which is really the focal point of what was going on at Newlands. Important to note that the EECS did build on a history of good environmental practice set out in things like RP and land managers options. Yeah, just a bit of speculation there as to whether or not we're moving towards a kind of outcome-based environmental scheme in the future. So Robert, do you want to jump in and give us a kind of overview of what's going on at Newlands?
So first of all, thank you very much, Alec. For some reason, my webcam won't go on, so I'm sure you'll all cope, but you won't be able to see me. Oh, actually, it is working. So there we go. Unfortunately, you will be able to see me. The Newlands, basically, so to start with, I'm a beef specialist for SEC Consulting, and I do that full time. So I basically spend most of my days talking about beef cows, which is great. But one part of my job, which I've thoroughly enjoyed, actually, is doing some work with Farming and Water Scotland. So with that, we were going around various shows back when that was allowed, or when there were shows on, we were going around various shows and meeting up with farmers and basically giving some good hints and tips as to how we can better obey the rules. What I was aware of, though, it was a kind of conflicting role, because for work I was telling people what to do, and then when I went home to Newlands, we probably weren't compliant with most of what I was telling people to do. So Newlands itself is about 300 acres. It's an upland farm just on the Ayrshire-Lanarkshire border. We farm Loudon Hill, which is a volcanic plug, and is actually quite if anybody's seen The Outlaw King, it's where Robert the Bruce had a battle, William Wallace has had a battle, the Covenanters have had a battle. There's been a lot of fighting. Thankfully, up to now, I've had no fighting with SEPA or Ayrshire Rivers Trust, so hopefully that continues. But yeah, so what we get is we get a lot of tourism, we get a lot of people across the farm, and that's a bit of a challenge, but also it's a privilege to be farming in an area with a bit of beauty and something to come and see. So what we do there, just as an introduction, is we run about 300 mostly Clin breeding ewes and about 40 shorthorn cross cows, and try and obviously for the sake of my work, we try and keep it nice and simple. So we've got a nice tight calving period and quite a quick lambing as well. The issue we had was with regards to we're as I say, we're fairly remote, so we've no mains water, and our water supply was all from a spring supply, which was basically a third of the way up the farm. The springs all rise from the base of the hill, but the tank itself was a third of the way up. So 2/3 of the farm had no water supply at all, and the below the spring tank was the kind of conflict. Some of you will probably be aware of what happens when to wives and mothers when the cows get all the water and they've got none left for the house. So it was a bit of a challenge. So water's always been a bit of an issue for us. So obeying the rules, fencing water margins, and improving things was a real challenge because we couldn't actually get a reliable water supply to most of the fields that we were dealing with. With that in mind, we applied for an AIC scheme, and luckily we were lucky to be accepted and have installed 2 solar-powered water systems, which are basically, it's actually been a bit of a revolution, to be honest. It's a drastically improved grazing management. We can now rotate round a bit, and I would hate to think people thought I was a rotational grazing guru, but we can certainly, grazing management's improved, and hopefully down in years to come will improve. There's a bit of improvement to come yet. So that was useful. Alec, could you skip on to the next slide? So just as an overview of the farm, so we actually farm 2 farms. We've got Newlands, which is the big farm on the east side there. That's the home farm and has Loudon Hill in the middle of it. And then to the west, there's another block of ground which randomly is Loudon Hill Farm, which doesn't have Loudon Hill on it. But those are the 2 blocks. So all predominantly, it's all grassland. Most of it's ploughable, technically ploughable, but it's a grassland upland farm. The yellow lump you see in the middle is a lump of basalt, which was, as I said before, the volcanic plug, and it's a real what we've defined as a habitat mosaic. It's all kinds of everything on there. There's a bit of woodland, there's a bit of gorse, there's some sheer cliffs with peregrine falcons on them, and all kinds of different things in there. So, and a lot of people as well, which can be a challenge. Other than that, to the south side of the bottom of the screen is the River Irvine. So the River Irvine comes along the bottom of the 2 farms and then up the east side as well. So actually the River Irvine is our march boundary with neighbours, and it's also to the east there, that's also the Ayrshire and Lanarkshire border. So the River Irvine is very important. It's very we're at the upper course of it, but it's obviously an important river and an important salmon or fish spawning ground as well. And I'm sure I don't need to go into too much detail there. What else do we need to say here? So yeah, we've got a mixed farm, and as you can see, there's quite a length of water margin there. About half of the stuff on Newlands had been fenced in a rural stewardship scheme probably about 20 years ago. We actually had an open day when it was first done, and the reason I now think it's 20 years ago is Struan was saying the Ayrshire Rivers Trust has been on the go for about 20 years. One of the first things he did was electrofishing demonstration at our open day. So that was a bit of a tangent there. So we had fenced that water margin in the past and never missed the ground that we lost. It was, that poorer edge of river stuff, probably a bit fluky, and some of it was kind of challenging steep bankings and things as well. So we had it fenced off, never missed it, and actually really quite enjoyed the kind of a conservation benefit of it too. So we were always keen to get the rest of the farm into a scheme and create something similar. So Alec, do you want to skip on? So what we did, and I must thank at this stage, thank Alec, who was a big help in pulling together my EEC scheme. To be honest, the scheme's quite it's a bit of a challenging thing to pull together, and Alec's brain is a lot better suited to EEC schemes than mine. So Alec did as an EEC scheme, and basically what the main thing we were looking for was a water supply to these fields And to get that, we had to do a few other things, and all of these other things actually fairly well complement what we're doing anyway. So, as I say, alternative watering was the top of the list, and that was partly because it had become almost it was a kind of pet job, if you like, for work. It was something I really enjoyed talking about and had helped a lot of people with. So I'd always been keen to get involved and do it myself. With that, we obviously have water margins, and you can see in that photograph a bit of work on the go, and the 6 metre wide or just over 6 metre water margin that we put in. As well as that, on top of that, if you maybe want to skip to the next one, Alec, which is the management map, is basically the stuff we've got to do to justify the funding. So we've got a small amount of species rich grassland, which is an old railway and a paddock, and also we've got some late cut silage for birds, open or wader grazed grassland, and the hill itself is a habitat mosaic. We've got 2 new hedges in, or 2 gapped up hedges, and also the significant water margin on the place as well. With the alternative watering system, we put in 2. You can see why we would need 2 different blocks of ground. We put in 2 solar systems. We looked at all the options, and it was the one that really fitted the best. We could have used a Papa pump, we could have used various other systems, but the solar pump was the simplest option, really. And so far it's working really pretty well. Through the summer it worked great. We're now into, obviously, days are getting shorter, and so far so good. We're still getting plenty, more water. Supply is greater than demand, so that's encouraging at this stage, and we'll see where we are in the next couple of months when the days are at their shortest. If you want to skip on, Alec. So basically, as I said, we installed these solar powered pumps, and they're actually becoming, you can now get really good systems basically off the shelf. Ours is from a company called Solar Pump Solutions, which are an Irish company, and they were great to deal with, and I've so far provided a system that's really, really useful. What we've put in is a pressurized system, so rather than having a pump and storage system, we've gone with effectively it's a solar powered, it behaves like a mains supply, so the pump brings everything up to near mains pressure, and then the water pressure is always there in the pipe. The challenge we had was, obviously, with a hill in the middle, over 300 acres, we go from 450 feet to 1100 feet and back down on the other side. So we've got quite a lot of steep land and some challenging terrain. So we needed to beef these things up a wee bit. And I would encourage anybody who's investing in a system like this, don't go for the cheapest one and don't go for the bare minimum of what you need. Spec it up a bit and spend a wee bit more money. You'll not have to spend a lot more money to get an awful lot more output. So these systems are becoming reasonably economical. They're still an investment, but they're reasonably economical, and I would encourage you to beef them up a bit and make them work for you. What's been great is, particularly this one's on Loudon Hill, the smaller block of land. We've been able to, it lends itself really pretty well to rotational grazing, and we've been able to carve that up and basically create a really pretty reasonable rotational grazing system without going to, it's fairly straightforward, and the water supply is reliable there. So yeah, it's been great. The water margin itself is when we were pegging it out, it seemed as though we were going to lose a bit of ground, and actually, now we know we're actually carrying a lot more stock on that farm than we were before, because we can grow more grass. And it's amazing, as Struan mentioned, it's amazing how quickly things change actually once we start fencing them off. And this water margin here is not far from my neighbour on the other side, he's the neighbour that gets you out of a hole right, left and centre. He's a great neighbour, but he keeps bees, and now we fenced that in about March time, and the whole water margin was full of various wildflowers and things, and he is over the moon bee wise. And it's just a wee bit of a tangent, but kind of multiple benefits, and I think it's really quite nice to see an investment at our end that's suiting our farming activity, also suiting Struan and the fish end of things, but also I think for that wider landscape benefit and a biodiversity benefit too. And all these things, as Alec mentioned at the start, are outcome-based subsidy schemes and things down the line. None of this stuff can do us any harm. So it's been great to do, and I'm really quite excited to see what these different water margins and things do in years to come. And yeah, I think so. Basically, what I'm trying to say is it's what we've done really complements what we're doing. Some of the wader grazed grassland and other options which have got grazing restrictions on them have been a wee bit more challenging. You don't get paid money for doing nothing, and they've been a wee bit of a headache at odd times in the year, but they're really the engine room that's allowed us to do the bit that's really making the thing work for us. So, and at the end of the day, it's also, we've got all these benefits and all the good stuff that I've mentioned, but we also get a management payment every year as well, and it's not massive, but it's significant enough, and certainly we would miss it if it wasn't there. So yeah, that's that. And basically the system there was, as I say, it's an off-the-shelf system, and it's basically plug and play. So we had to spend a bit of time putting an abstraction point in, and the abstraction point is really the most important part. So we need to have a setup where we can't alter the bed of the burn. Struan would probably be better to come in this one, but the abstraction point, I needed it to be below the bed of the burn and always have a good supply of water to it. But when you install it, you need to do that in a sensitive manner to the river as well. So once you've got your abstraction point in, installing that pump, I think it took maybe a couple of hours, not even, and that included bolting it down to 2 concrete panels and things. It was really straightforward, and we were good to go. So the solar thing is a good option. What's an even better option, or 2 better options than solar, are gravity. So if gravity can do it for you, if you can have an abstraction point and then an abstraction point at the top, and then drain the water, use the water pipe effectively like a drain, you've got a great setup with no pumping costs and no wear and tear. On top of that, the one issue I would flag up for alternative watering, we're in an upland or a upper course situation where we are surrounded by other livestock, but it's not a hugely intensive livestock area, and a non-industrial area as well. So what we were fairly happy with, we tested it as well, but we were happy with water quality before we started pumping. If I was in a very intensive area and had known issues round about, I would be cautious before I installed alternative watering systems. Basically, if you wouldn't drink the water yourself, I don't think we should be encouraging cattle to drink it either, or cattle or sheep to drink it. So just a bit of thought before, and take time to make some plans and have some discussions before you start, just to make sure that what you're doing is actually going to be fit for purpose. Do the job that SEPA and Ayrshire Rivers Trust need it to do, and also be safe and ultimately make you some money. Can you skip on, Alec? Yeah, so just things to consider before you jump in is, I would, and this is not about seeking advice from SEC Consulting, that would be great if you did, but there's plenty of other places to go, and often the best place to go is a neighbour or a friend or somebody else who's done this type of system. So ask questions, make sure you know what you're getting into before you start. And if you are looking at an EEC scheme, or setting up a system for alternative watering, if perhaps SEPA have come along and said, look, it's time, we need this to be fenced off, and you need to install a system, try and make those systems or schemes work for you. Try and see what else you can get out of them from a business point of view, because it could be by spending another couple of £100, you could get an awful lot more out of it for your money. As I said before, the abstraction point is critical, and we've got some really good guidance there as to how to design an abstraction point and how to build one. And effectively, it's as simple as an inverted twin wall pipe and some gravel. But if you do it right, it'll work. It'll work 100%. If you do it wrongly, it's going to lead to nothing but problems. So spending time on that abstraction point, finding the right place for it, speaking to the right people, and probably getting the right person to do it is really quite important. Again, over-specking, and you don't have to go daft, but I would avoid paying for the bare minimum and add a wee bit more to it if you can, and see what else you can get out it. As I said before, go and see. There's nothing beats going to see. I appreciate that there's restrictions and issues at the moment, but likes of our systems, if anybody did want to come and see what we've done or what other systems have been done, would be very welcome. And I think most people who've done systems like this would be keen to show them off a wee bit too. And as I said, also storage as well. Sorry, I missed it. It's always cheaper to store water than it is to store electricity. So for some systems, we've got a battery system or 2 battery systems on the go, or battery backups for the solar panels to work a pressurized system. But in some cases, if you can pump to the highest point, you can then have a really nice gravity fed system from there. And actually storing a lot of water at that stage then means that the solar or the whatever's driving it, there's less demand on it. Particularly for solar, there's less demand on it in the winter time if you can store more. So just something to consider. Gravity is your friend. Make use of it if you can. And for all of this, alternative watering is great, and there's some really good systems out there. But if you can get mains water anywhere close to where you need it, it's worth spending the money to actually install a reliable main supply. And I think that's me, Alec.
Okay, so I'll just come back there. We're just about to kick off the question and answer session. Thanks very much, Robert, and indeed Struan. Struan, I don't know if you have, but can you unmute your mic and we'll just jump into these questions. So the first question I've got here, and I should say for context, Struan, if I remember right, you also wrote a letter of support for Robert's EECS. So it was very much a combined effort tonight.
Thank you for that,
Struan.
It's always nice as well to hear that an EECS is working out for clients. Typically what I find doing these kind of applications are that the workload is kind of top heavy to before the application, and once it's been submitted that there isn't an awful lot of feedback. So no, it's good to hear that it's working out for you, Robert. The first question that we've got here, Robert, is one for you, and it's a question of how are you managing your EECS water margins? Are you grazing? Are you cutting? What's your plan?
So we're in year 1, so that's important to note. So we're well into year 1. So at the moment it's ungrazed or excluded at the moment, but every water margin has a gate into it, and the intention is to give it a light graze in the autumn. Probably just with sheep, as much basically because of the long narrow strip, the nature of a water margin, logistically putting cattle into it. I know Struan wouldn't probably be that happy if I put cattle in it anyway, but if I did, I just don't quite know how that would end up. There's corners and bits and pieces. So I think a few sheep in the autumn. None of them would be cuttable anyway, but I know some people who are cutting and doing a pretty good job with that, and it seems to be working fine.
Struan, on that note, do you have any thoughts or any advice for people who are grazing water margins?
Not much beyond what Robert said. I think just taking a pragmatic approach to it, and if it's a narrowish strip and you've got bankings that are potentially vulnerable, then putting something heavy on it is liable to collapse. But if you can get away with a couple of sheep or a few sheep and keep a close eye on it and check when you've got it to the level you want it to be, then remove them, then yeah, that sounds ideal.
The next question we've got here is regarding the EECS application round and the gap in funding right now. It is, well, I'll just go ahead and answer this if both of you are happy for me to do it. The 2020 application round, Scottish Government made the decision to offer extensions to 2016 applications that were coming to an end. So if you were one of the fortunate farmers to to get in 2016, you will in effect have a 6-year contract, or will have been offered the opportunity of a 6-year contract. It remains to be seen whether or not there is going to be additional EECS funding going into 2021, but we're hopeful for that. Right. The next question here is, what do both of you think the importance of water will be in the future SRDP?
It's a good question. What we keep hearing about the future SRDP or future of whatever that funding in general is, it's all about public good. So water quality has to be a public good. You know, there's no doubt about it. It already is well up on the government agenda, and I think certainly in our part of it, I think over Scotland, it's a good news story as well that we've actually made a lot of progress with water quality, really improved it. And that's thanks to everybody who's got involved with, you know, all farmers have made changes, and you know, I think the water thing's a good news story, and I think it's one we shouldn't be shy and maybe pointing out what we have done. There's plenty. I know Struan will tell us there's plenty more we can do and should do, but I would expect that the future SRDP would include some kind of a pat on the back for good work done for water quality.
Struan, any thoughts?
I can't speak too much on the SRDP system. It's not something I know too much about, but initially this, I think, all came about through the EU directive, which was the Water Framework Directive. Obviously, going forward, coming out the EU, that will no longer be the main driver for it. But with the River Basin Management Plans, the big driver is to improve, I think, bathing water quality. So it's sort of the end point there, and having beaches that people can go and enjoy safely and not have to worry about the water quality. And I think I'm right in saying, well, correct me if I'm wrong, that the bathing water qualities around our coastlines anyway have been failing and have done for the last few years. So yeah, I mean, I think I think Robert's right. There's been lots of improvements made, and those should be where the improvements are coming. We should be advocating those and showing people the way forward. But not to take the foot off the pedal too much, and know that there are still improvements to be made, and keep pushing forward with it.
The other area I think that is going to become more apparent is the kind of flood management stuff and our role in that. So I don't know where. I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't even know if the government's far enough down that road to know how they're going to fund everything that we do, or how they're going to balance the books on that. But I definitely think the water, rivers and water are going to be well up the list.
I kind of definitely agree with both of you. I think one of the interesting things about water from a land management point of view is that it's fairly universal across Scotland. You know, you're not looking at insects, you're not looking at breeding birds that can have more of a kind of spatial distribution. You know, everybody has water, and you know, presumably the same test can be done on water quality throughout Scotland. So definitely important. There's another question coming in here. Is there any movement towards supporting riparian planting schemes? Now, I don't know, Robert or Struan, whether or not you want to mention anything about this, but I'll just say that I would encourage you to check out episode 1 of this series, where we had David Eadie on, who is our woodland specialist, and he did touch on riparian planting options. I think I would generally say that riparian planting options are well, the riparian water habitat is important, and you know, I would encourage any measure to kind of protect and enhance it.
Yeah, I agree. My knowledge of the grant system for these things won't be anything like as good as Robert or Alex, but likes of what we've done with Alec and the advisory service, if we get asked to consult on one of these things, and we're very happy to put our input into it and see if we can make any suggestions as to how it could be made better, or where we know there to be issues. We've got quite detailed local knowledge. I mean, across all of Ayrshire, it'd be a rare occasion where you could find a burn that we haven't electrified in recent years and have some sort of historical data on. So we're very happy to be into all these things to support fencing, planting, whatever people are seeking to do. And we're always very happy to take a phone call or email or go and even visit and talk over where we see problems, because we probably have, coming at it from a different angle, we have slightly different perspectives on how we'd like to see things implemented and what we see as being problems, versus what people on the ground see as being problems, versus what SEPA might see as being problems. So it starts to get a bit top heavy in the terms of numbers of people you start to pull into these conversations, but I think at the end of the day, there's everyone's got their bit to put into it, and hopefully what comes of that is a stronger application that will get the funding.
Struan, there's a question in the chat here for you specifically. Thoughts on the move away from plastic and using compostable tubes to protect trees?
Yeah, we've actually looked into this. We were going to trial it in an education project we had to do with some schools. Just because we didn't want to do anything, we didn't want to go and do a large scale tree planting anywhere and find actually the guards were rubbish for whatever reason. So doing 30 or 50 trees with a school, you had 5 schools lined up for it, but unfortunately then COVID came in and sort of kiboshed that. So on the face of it, sounds good. We quite often pull tree guards off trees. One of the things that happens when trees are planted, okay, guards go onto them, but then at some point, someone should really be revisiting these trees and taking the guards off them, because the trees outgrow the guards. So we sort of inadvertently end up recycling these and using them for ourselves. We'll just put a couple of holes, a hole punch in them, cable tie them, and put a new stake in, and we'll reuse them. But I don't think that happens very often. Ours is done out of necessity and lack of funding more often than not. But yeah, if these tree guards have a certain lifespan, and that's in tandem with the growth of the tree, and they start to break down after sort of year 5 or 6, something like that, and the tree no longer requires it, then it could be a very useful way forward. It save revisits.
And another question here for you, Struan. Do you foresee any more emphasis on catchment management or natural flood management going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something, if you look across not just Scotland's trust network, but if you look down south and into England and Wales, natural flood management techniques are becoming, they've got more and more of the sort of precedent going now. I think with what we're seeing climate change wise, with it being heavier, the same kind of quantities of rainfall, but the severity of the floods are coming over winter now, and we're getting longer sort of drier spells that might not feel like it over summer. Anything that you can do to buffer the peaks of flows, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier on with upland tree planting, but starting to think about forestry and how they are managing their drainage so that water doesn't just hit the ground and then run straight into a burn. It's captured, and I mean, ideally, we're talking about this in the office this afternoon. What you want is your landscape to act like a sponge and to release the water slowly. If you go up into a sort of a more highland situation, where the agriculture isn't intense, you've got more peatland and moorland, that water falls and is absorbed and it's released slowly over a long period of time. We're down here, we manage water in a different way. We don't want it on our land. is not good if you're trying to grow crops, or you don't want a soggy field. But ultimately, we're paying the price for it now with building in floodplains, and people are ended up flooded, like the Daily. I think they have something like an annual bill of sort of £35,000 a year from flooding damages. So yeah, I think natural flood management techniques and focusing at a catchment scale, not just sort of an isolated problems, is the way forward. And there are more and more landscape partnership projects that are designed to work in that direction.
And one more question here about the FAS funding that is available through the Farm Advisory Service for woodland planning. So there is currently up to £1,000 set aside by FAS for businesses to have a woodland specialist come out and devise a strategy for how they take the woodland component of their business forward. Specifically, if you were looking for that on the website, it comes under Woodland and Conservation Specialist Grant, and I would encourage you to check the website for more details there. All right, one last question here, Robert. When you decided to put in your water margins, was it more of a preventative step, or was there an issue that you were aware of that you wanted to get on top of?
Yeah, so we are out with the operational area for SEPA's. We're in the River Irvine catchment, but out with the operational area, so we didn't receive a priority catchment visit. But I know if we had received a priority catchment visit, there would have been a few pinch points. I don't think we were doing anything majorly wrong, but there was a few areas that were, a bit of poaching issue here and there. Historical water access points to the river and things that probably I knew we needed to do something, and the funding was there to help us do it. If we were doing it ourselves, I think what we would have done would have been very different, and I think that's a really important point. Is what we've done through AICS is probably belt and braces. We've created a fully excluded water margins that can be fully managed, and to me that's the best outcome. But at the same time, a single electric wire in those difficult areas will make a difference. Excluding cattle and allowing sheep in, it's maybe not exactly what Struan wants to hear, but from a compliance point of view, there's a lot you can do on quite a small budget as well. So I would be doing something to help those challenging areas. Fencing off hotspots would be one good option. So yeah, were we forced to do it? We weren't forced to do it, but I think if we had received a visit, we would have been in a position we had to do something. So yeah, that's why we did it. And genuinely, not just saying it because I'm on here, but really pleased we did kick on and do something, because I think our farm were more resilient, we're better for it, and it's certainly enjoyed the process so far. So
good. Well, that's us come to the end of our questions here. By all means, put more in the chat. If we don't get to it before the end, we will make a point of getting back in touch with anybody who's asked any questions. But I will just move on, and we will wind down for the evening. Okay. So the next webinar, the last in the series, is going to be on the 24th of November, and it will cover drainage and ditching, and that is with Peter Wright and Gavin Elric, who is one of our North colleagues. So unfortunately, this will be our last webinar on this series. But yes, please check the FAS website for details on that event. And finally, we've mentioned it throughout the night, but please, we would encourage you to take a look at the Farming and Water Scotland website for some really great resources on how to protect your water environment, manage your water, and like as Robert says, that there's some helpful tips and advice sheets available there. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for joining us this evening, Robert and Struan. It's been much appreciated, and Seamus, our producer, sitting in the background. It's been a good one. So thank you very much for joining us, and good night.